And we are live. Welcome to the next and the last session of the Tech Excellence Conference 2024. Our very last talk for today is with Sonya Natanzon. Sonya is a seasoned engineer leader and software architect. She experiments with various methodologies such as domain-driven design, team topologies, architectural advice process, and speaks about the outcomes at international software conferences and meetups. She will be presenting today the topic, so you think you might be an architect. Feel free to write your questions and comments in the chat below. Sonya, enjoy your presentation.
Thank you so much for that. All right, welcome. Last talk. Something different for us. So, the origin story for this talk is interesting. It actually comes from another conference where I spoke, and I introduced myself as a software engineer who became a software architect. And after my talk, one of the attendees approached me and asked, well, I'm an engineer. How do I become a software architect? And what does this even mean to be one? What do architects do? My response, this is a question I've gotten before, my response to that invariably is to go into self-deprecating humor, and it's always a joke. And the joke goes like this. Do you know what the difference is between a senior developer and an architect? Well, architects can draw pretty diagrams. That's the difference. Little tongue-in-cheek, but some days certainly feel like that. And after this, I told them that really the definition of a software architect is a little nebulous. At least it was back in the day. This was some years ago. Definitely the path to becoming one can be windy and unusual. And as we chatted, I listed a few things that software architects do. And I told them, if you're finding yourself doing these things, you might already be a software architect, only without a title. And that got me thinking, how do I explain what a software architect is and what she does? The first time I actually thought about it was when my son was 6. I was picking him up from school, and he wanted me to carry his backpack home. He said he was tired, and I told him, well, I'm tired too. I worked all day. And he looked at me and he said, but all you do is press computer buttons. And it's so true, but there's also so much more to it. So how do I explain my job to either a 6-year-old or to anyone else? Maybe software architects need a good tagline. I know a really good one for product. A friend of mine who is in product says that the job of product is to build stuff we can sell and sell stuff we can build, which is awesome, spot on. Architects need an elevator spiel. If you need to explain it to somebody in a minute that you're taking an elevator ride, that's important. But what I'd like to come out of this is a more in-depth explanation of what architects do for those who want to become one. So when I at least used to think of software architects, I always thought about consultants, these people who come in on a temporary basis, usually to kick us off on a new project, maybe adopt a new technology, implement something, sometimes save a project that's circling the drain. They come in with a title, and they actually don't stay for too long. But what about people who work at companies or government or academia? Aren't there architects there? You know, those who don't work for consultancies and stay in the same place? Well, that's me. That's my introduction. I'm a software engineer who became an architect. I lead engineering teams. I spent my career in healthcare, and this moniker that I adopted is an essence of what I do. I try to make things simple, and I'll come back to this sometime during the talk. So how or when did I first realize that I was a software architect? I think maybe the first realization dawned on me at about third or fourth presentation of solution options to stakeholders, when first two failed to get buy-in. Or maybe it was when the buy-in finally occurred, but it was for a very phased implementation. So this beautiful picture that I had in my mind of the architect, or not in my mind, on paper, that I wanted to implement got gutted due to business and timeline constraints. I realized back then that there are a lot of compromises in this job. And if you know a definition of a good compromise, it's when no one really walks away too happy. So what is the role of a software architect? What do they do? In a nutshell, software architect provides leadership. This might be a good place to stop and finish this presentation, but of course, I'll unpack more what that means, but that is really it. And one of the reasons why I talk about this role of an architect is because I don't think it's readily apparent to many that leadership is actually a primary function of a software architect. This became very obvious to me when I entered an organization where leadership qualities by themselves held no value. The primary contribution that was valued was code. And I saw a lot of architectural and organizational dysfunctions emerge. So today I'll talk about what kind of leadership software architect provides, what skills they need to provide it, and how to avoid certain common pitfalls. So these are the three types of leadership that software architect provides: people, thought, and technical leadership. Software architect operates at the intersection of the three and has to utilize all three to be successful. If you're finding yourself leading in those three areas, you might already be an architect. To be effective in each area, architect needs to develop specific skills that I will go through. And I'll start with what I would argue is the most important one, which is people leadership. The key skill in people leadership area is influence. You are solving problems, and there's not many that you can solve entirely by yourself. To help you solve those problems, you will need buy-in from your stakeholders, from engineering teams, from your peers, from your boss. All of these folks will want to know what value the solution brings. So the value proposition and sharpening it for each area becomes very important. What's in it for each functional area. And the solution, I use the word solution here very broadly. It could be something from a typical technical software solution. It could also be a change to a business process, change to a technical process, say how often you deploy code, to organizational and socio-technical change. Influencing is going to involve a lot of conversations at many different levels, from engineers to C-suite. That's your engineering or architect elevator. It involves sifting through a lot of advice, understanding how it's applicable or where it's not. And these multiple cycles of separating the wheat from the chaff, the important from not important, should land you with a compromise, but one that brings value to all parts of the organization that it serves. So it wouldn't be a conference without bringing Conway's Law out even once. I'll be the one to do that. And this goes to the influence portion. Conway's Law, in a nutshell, states that org structure influences architecture. Of course, we just said that architect influences architecture quite directly. They try to shape it. Architect can also influence architecture indirectly through influencing organizational structure, aligning teams to value streams, to platforms, to complex subsystems. This should all sound familiar from team topologies. And of course, there are other methodologies for getting to great outcomes in architecture and for fast flow and delivery. But I was always very surprised how small of enough overlap of people who know about these methodologies and who can also do something about it. It actually lands pretty squarely within architects' purview to share that knowledge and to help shape the org structure or architecture through the org structure. The next area is growing new talent and next generation of architects. It is difficult to accomplish large objectives alone, and I would say not as much fun. And the best way to get a peer architect is to train one. So find somebody who aspires to reach that next level and provide the necessary opportunity, guidance to develop these skills that I'm talking about right now. Knowledge sharing is another very important area of people leadership. Architect is often a hub of information. They are exposed to everything from business to product to project to engineering information, and they can and should meaningfully convey it to other functions. They also have this interpret mode in them where they understand the implications of certain changes. So it becomes incumbent upon them to do that translation of what does this particular business initiative mean for technology and vice versa. I find myself doing this translation quite a bit. It can get complex, but it is very much an engineering function to bring the right information at the right level to the right people at the right time so that all of the initiatives that we're working on are successful. So what skills do you need to be an effective people leader? It's going to sound funny, but you need people skills. To influence, you need to understand motivation and be able to find an appropriate approach. Some people are going to be motivated by learning, some by recognition, some by building something really cool and new and putting it on their resume. Different teams will be motivated by different things. Engineers might be motivated by exploring new tech, executives by getting bigger revenue, marketing by getting a product out in time for an industry event. Coaching and teaching skills are going to be critical for growing talent and creating next generation of architects. Providing guidance and feedback, not doing everything yourself. Tempting as that might be, doing things is the fun part. Being able to delegate and support others and work through problem without giving all the answers or forcing the answers. And creating room for experimentation and mistakes with ability to tolerate mistakes, but at the same time set the guardrails, setting appropriate guardrails to avoid catastrophic failures. So fine balance to strike there. Communication skills. If you noticed so far, all the skills here needed communication. And even though they call it a soft skill, this is actually quite a difficult skill to be a good communicator. What does that mean to be a good communicator? It means engaging in healthy and constructive debate, putting together well-reasoned arguments, avoiding groupthink, that's a big one, listening and absorbing, not just listening to respond and react. It also means tailoring your message to the audience and having the right amount of detail. Your presentation that has this of a single message should look very different to C-suite than to engineers. And this is super critical if you want to be understood. I actually witnessed firsthand an engineer who had to step into a leadership role who was never really able to adjust to his language. And I saw the frustration in all the parties when he tried to address executives as if they were a group of engineers. No one felt understood. No one felt that they were getting the information that they wanted and needed. This is not just verbal skills. A good architect actually wants to write things down and understands the importance of a written word. This is frequently counter to typical agile, fast engineering cultures where code is the only documentation that's needed. I know maybe less of a popular opinion, but anyone who said that has never been in an audit. You have probably all been in a meeting where you discussed a problem, understood it, walked out of it, only to get together next time and realize that everybody walked away with a slightly different understanding. Writing things down really helps to level set with that, organize your thoughts, and make sure that everybody walks away with the same type of understanding. I want to digress for just a second into this concept of the four immeasurables. And the concepts here are of near and far enemies. This concept comes from Buddhism, and there's these four virtues that have their far enemies and near enemies. And while far enemy is really obvious, it's a complete opposite of the virtue. The near enemy actually looks very similar to the virtue, but differs in a dangerous way. Similarly, each area of leadership for an architect has a near enemy that may look like that leadership, but in fact differs in a subtle and sometimes unhelpful way. So what's the near enemy of people leadership? Well, it's functional management. And I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with functional management per se. In fact, it's a very useful and necessary skill. Functional manager hires, provides feedback, reviews, builds a team, works on career and skills development. They're a people manager. They're also responsible for a function, let's just for fun say manufacturing, and all the projects that involve that function. That's another set of skills that they apply, being able to work with budgets, managing resources, timelines, processes, and technical aspects of those projects. This is where it gets a little tricky. Pure functional management without influence component doesn't really get you that far. If I bring it back to software, there are two types of architects, those with teams and without. I've been both kinds, and I would argue that being one without a team is actually a lot more challenging because you really have to rely on your influence in order to get anything accomplished. When you have a team, it's easy to fall into the trapping of thinking that you can accomplish what you need with just your team and your position power, and you no longer need to leverage your influence so heavily. So what does functional management look like without influence? Well, it looks a lot like telling people what to do and task mastering. You might still accomplish your objectives because you have position power, but support for your decisions will be grudging. And what happens then is a lot of decisions tend to get reopened because there wasn't a support or buy-in for them to begin with. And of course, position power doesn't extend beyond your team, doesn't extend to your stakeholders or other teams. So that always limits what you can accomplish. You can't go broader and broader and work on bigger and bigger things. If I contrast that with leadership with influence, this is convincing people that what you're proposing is a good idea, understanding the value of it and making sure there is value in it for multiple functions, and also being very generous with the credit for the idea. Sometimes it's letting people think it was their idea in order for you to push it forward. So moving on to the second leadership, which is technical leadership. How does a software architect lead in the technology realm? Well, first by constant learning. You have to know technology in order to make educated choices and understand trade-offs. We all know how fast technology moves. There's always something new. There's patterns, there's practices, frameworks, languages, trends, AI that we all have to use now. This constant learning, of course, comes paired with the teaching and information sharing that I just talked about. In order for knowledge to be applied, it can't be hoarded with an architect. Architect evangelizes to the team. They show the value of these new things, and they drive progress. Second, technical leadership is in selecting a toolbox. How many JavaScript frameworks do you know? Many. How many do you need? I'm guessing one. For now, for long term, how do you balance that with the skill sets that you currently have available? Your ability to hire, to train. Architects analyze tools, they collaborate on tool selection, they roll them out, they do the training. Another important role for them is they help prevent tool proliferation and duplication. Sometimes we go to too many tools, and I've seen this happen a lot with monitoring and logging tools. At one point in the organization I worked in, we had like 5, your New Relic and SolarWinds and Splunk and Grafana and a few other things. We definitely didn't need all of them, but people came in, they brought in what they knew without consulting or understanding broader needs. An architect can be the linchpin that helps lead that conversation of tools. Third, technical leadership takes shape of building a scaffolding projects. While you may not implement a project start to finish, creating a scaffold for implementation helps ensure that design materializes as envisioned and cement patterns that you want to put in place. What the scaffold is entirely depends on the project. It can be anything: technology selection, data model, workflow, or process definition. It can be API definition, a service boundary identification, or a combination of any of those items. Since architecture is about important stuff, whatever that is, and that's my next famous quote, identify what is important or foundational to the project and scaffold that. Alternatively, you can look for what is likely to go really wrong and cause a big collapse or a domino effect and scaffold that instead. So what skills do you need to be a technical lead? Well, similar to people skills, you need technical skills, but once again, I'll go through that in detail. For constant learning, it's actually all the skills that you learn in kindergarten and onward from there. These are your 4 C's: your creative thinking, your critical thinking, your communication, and collaboration. Communication shows up here again, must be important. To fill your toolbox with right tools, your best skill here is a research skill, which is gathering, organizing, and interpreting information systemically, but not just academic research, but more strategic research. You are surveying the market, not just looking for the next shiny thing. You have to combine it with what you see as the next thing needed for you on the horizon. And other than the technical need and fit, there's many things to consider and evaluate. Maturity of the tool or your desire and willingness to be early adopter, level of support for the tool, licensing consideration. We've seen some open source licensing go a different way. The skill set on your team and your ability to hire or train, and whether these new skills would be an uplift for the team or maybe make the team run away. For building a scaffold, you need your foundational software engineering skills: coding, frameworks, best practice thinking, and problem solving. Of course, technical leadership has its own near enemy, and that near enemy is being a really in the weeds technical contributor. Again, nothing wrong with being an individual contributor. That is just an architect without a team. And it's always great to keep your coding skills sharp. I'll talk about that in a minute. But being really deep in the weeds and having tactical coding responsibilities, stories you need to deliver, bugs to fix, rarely leaves time for broader strategy. Remember the organization that I managed that didn't value leadership skills? Well, I went along initially, started delivering more tactically. And as long as I was deep in code, I had no time for anything strategic, nothing even as basic as tool selection. And the moment I started focusing on strategic initiatives, I became a bottleneck for code delivery. But the question that I'm sure you're asking yourself, and I've asked myself, is could you really be an architect without coding every day? Many would say no. My answer to that is yes, but with some applied effort. A few things helped in my experience. One is doing things like proofs of concept, greenfield projects, or new tech evaluation projects. All of these are variants on a theme of something new is being brought in and needed. You have an opportunity to go as deep or as shallow as you want, and the stakes are low. The chances of your code going to production without being heavily augmented are quite low. So if you can engage on those, do that. The other one is keep a pet project, that is. Usually it's a piece of code or a project you design and develop that you heavily contributed to, that you're still continuing to shepherd in some way. You're familiar with the code base, and implementing an occasional feature or a fix is going to keep you sharp. Last one is not a desirable occurrence, but does happen when an architect has to roll up their sleeves to rescue a project. Though when it does happen, it gives you a chance to level up in a high pressure situation. So even though you might not code every day, if you keep that sine curve of going deep in the code and coming back up to strategy, you can keep those skills sharp. And finally, our last leadership bubble, which is thought leadership. This is the strategic leadership which starts with big picture thinking. Architects should live at big picture level, harmonizing requirements, technologies, solutions. Start by understanding the big picture as it is now. Learn some past history and learn from it. You're going to want to know how the current architecture evolved, what bumps and bruises were acquired along the way, and how to avoid them. And this also becomes a really fine balancing act. You want to know the history and learnings, but you don't want to be so bogged down by them that you fear change. Once you know what the big picture looks like, roadmap the evolution. You are going to want to have a roadmap beyond your next release, especially if you're doing those really fast releases, but you don't want to go too far. Things change fast. I've never found 3-year plans to be useful. That's a lot of expended effort for something that's just going to change. In my view, the most useful planning period is 6 months to a year. It helps to have a North Star a little bit further out. And that roadmap is always a living entity. It's maintained by the architect. Next, champion process. I know process is a dirty word in software development. Move fast, break things. However, having come from a regulated industry where mistakes can be very costly and affect people's lives, I've come to really appreciate the role of software development process, and I champion it in the organization. It typically gets associated with something very heavy-handed, waterfallish, lots of documentation no one maintains, but it does not have to be the case. Process is there to catch you when you fall. That's not if, when. Mistakes will invariably happen. And process is there to instill good engineering discipline. Code reviews, tests, peer feedback, other best practices. The key point to remember is process serves engineers, not the other way around. It is up to the software architect to continuously evaluate process and improve it so that it works for your specific organization or industry. Process in a small growing org is not going to be the same as in a large mature org, regulated versus unregulated, and so on. In short, make it another tool in your toolbox. Last, setting culture and values. Management consultant Peter Drucker once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Does that mean that all the strategic stuff I just talked about is not important? Not at all. What it does mean is the power of culture is enormous, and it is critical to the success of organization and its projects. Software architects should have values, and they're in the unique position to build, change, or influence culture in their organization. Here's where sometimes being an architect with a team works to your advantage, because you could set those values within the team, especially at formative stages, when you just build a team or maybe when you hire and onboard people. However, culture within a single team is never enough. No team is going to be an island, and architects should work to influence culture across teams. What values should an architect have? Well, it's individual. I have my own, which I'll share a few of them with you, but you should think about what yours are and how to bring them into your organization. My first value is simplicity. This talk was actually built long before I adopted that decomplexifier moniker, but that's always been top of mind. I don't think this value is sufficiently appreciated, as you can see from yet another famous quote. We work in a complex and ever-changing field. We are expected to be experts in the technology, be well-versed in our vertical business. We solve complex problems, and complexity will naturally show up in the solutions. The things we have to solve are our essential complexity. And then there is the other type that shows up when we try to future-proof, when we add bells and whistles, obsessed with clean code or design patterns. Why is simplicity a value I really espouse to? First, simple solutions decrease cognitive load. Cognitive load is the amount of mental effort that I have to expend in order to solve a problem. Mental capacity is limited. I know mine is. And I want to focus it on the essential complexity. If everything is complex, I eventually run out of capacity because I have to keep solving those non-essential problems. And I promise you that every industry is going to have its own essential complexity, not just rocket science. Simple solutions are maintainable. If you think about where you spend most of your time, it's not the solution design or implementation, it's maintenance. Unnecessarily complex solutions will make that job so difficult. There are a few things that I do for myself and for the teams in order to reduce cognitive load, and those become their own values. And this first one is, for short, naming things. It comes from another one of my favorite famous quotes by Phil Carlton. Naming things is no less important now than when this quote was first coined. Why? Well, bad names introduce high cognitive load. I'm sure you've all encountered variables that are just a single letter, function names that look like alphabet soup, that get really hard to follow and make sense of. This is a software that doesn't fit in our heads. Names are the domain language that is memorialized in code. And once the bad names take hold, they get really difficult to change, and combined cognitive load on the team is huge, very costly. That's why we strive to get to clear and descriptive names. And if you're familiar with domain-driven design, this is what's called a ubiquitous language. And software architects can help shape it. Super beneficial concept, definitely look into it. In addition to helping reduce cognitive load, it really facilitates communication between domain experts and software teams. If you think this is a new problem, it's not. You can look at this quote by Confucius, and the people were concerned with appropriately naming things thousands of years ago. What do I want out of a name? I want to be able to hear something and understand what it is or what it does. I will give you a couple of examples of good and bad names. All of them come from a service layer, so just imagine a word service attached to it. And these are fun to go through. Look at this one, auth. Can you guess what it does? Authentication, maybe. authorization, possibly. Can't tell from a name. Turned out it was authentication. When I asked why the service was named this way, I was told that it was intentionally vague because when it was originally designed, the person didn't know whether it was going to do one or both. And you know how many things are wrong with that statement. Breaking a single responsibility principle and intentionally vague. Somebody is trying to add cognitive load on their team members, which is just not great. I can accept accidentally vague, but this is just bad. We always name our services as noun service, verb service, order service, ticketing service. This was a new one for me, adjective service. My mind started fitting nouns after this adjective. Is it clinical trial, clinical evidence? Turned out to be none of those. And it was a little like naming a service, beautiful or medical or robust, doesn't give me a clue as to the function. And here's another one, my favorite, MISC. It wasn't even miscellaneous, it was MISC. Any idea what it does? Probably a grab bag of unrelated stuff, but even that could have probably been named something like utility. In any case, cognitive load is high with this one. Here's another one, support case creation service. I know what it does immediately. It creates support cases. Maybe I don't know what a support case is or what it's used for, but I don't have to immediately try and find an author of the service if I look at a diagram. So, summary, spend some time naming things. Find a name that's reflective of a function. Be intentionally clear. Don't abbreviate. Don't be stingy with words. I like to have more than one word. Too many words probably means the service has too many responsibilities. And remember, the names stick. Changing them is hard. And the collective cognitive load can be just too much. So the other thing that reduces cognitive load is applying patterns practically. We love patterns as software engineers, we really do. And sometimes we apply those patterns before a pattern actually emerges. You can hear that often in design discussions. It's like, ooh, this fits abstract factory. We should do this. Microservices, other things. But in the definition of a word pattern, the key word is repeated. How many repetitions do you need to see in order to have a pattern emerge? Is it just one? Is it two? Maybe three. I feel like three is a good start. And in fact, I love the rule of three. Lots of things in this presentation come in threes. I love this comic because this is somebody who tried to derive a pattern out of two, and it didn't work out very well for them. For the first instance of something, I am very happy to write the most straightforward code possible. For the second instance of the same something, I don't mind cut and paste at all. And for the third one, I can refactor the first two into an actual pattern that I am now seeing. My last value that I want to share with you is this no dogma. There have always been trends in software that come and go over decades, and you can see them wax and wane. I don't love adopting patterns wholly. I find it very restrictive and inflexible. There are always use cases that come up that don't fit a chosen pattern or an architecture type. It does not make sense to fit use cases to a pattern. Patterns and various methodologies are there to serve us. So rather than keeping to a particular methodology, I tend to pick and choose those aspects that suit my work best and not worry about the remainder of it. One example of process in this case rather than architecture is Agile. Coming from a regulated industry, I can't adopt Agile completely, but it doesn't mean that I can't benefit from it. I can pull out things that make sense and can be adopted, like self-organizing teams, like quick feedback, and not worry about everything else. So if I were to phrase it in the positive, I call this a pragmatic approach as opposed to dogmatic one. So for this area, skills, these are maybe more traits rather than skills. One unifying theme here is a drive for change, being a change agent and wanting to constantly improve things. You're never satisfied with status quo, and you want to make things better. You need to be able to use any experience, success or failure, for learning. Understand the why behind success or failure, and course correct. You want that flexibility, you want tolerance for failure, you want curiosity and willingness to experiment. So these traits might be counter to someone process-oriented and structured, but they really aren't. They are just a starting point for improvements. And of course, we should talk about the near enemy of thought leadership, and this is the ivory tower architecture. Ivory tower architects tend to make this process an academic exercise without a lot of practical value attached to it. Remember that at the end of the day, you still need to ship working code that brings business value. If you don't have that, then your architecture has no value. And you need to be able to balance out right with pragmatic and realistic. Never a clean and pretty picture. One sign of an ivory tower architecture is exclusionary architecture process, creating committees, approval boards. Architecture is democratic. Everybody architects, from engineering to product managers, everybody has a hand in it. The other sign of ivory tower is process for the sake of process. If you find yourself with a very bureaucratic process that seem to add no value and just to check a box, or a place where mistakes are managed by adding more process, this is probably an ivory tower place. To avoid that, ask yourself, what value does a particular decision or process change bring? And if you're not finding a good answer, don't do it. So, what do architects actually do in practical terms, other than press the proverbial computer buttons? Very quick 4 high-level phases that they go through. And remember that this will all look very neat here in PowerPoint, but a lot messier in real life and at a different scale. The first thing that architect does is they get to the core of a problem, performing analysis that supports their problem definition. This is typically a big task that requires eliciting information from multiple stakeholders. There's your communication skills again. Creating a succinct and meaningful problem statement is absolutely key to building a great solution. The artifacts that you produce at this phase, other than a problem statement, is supporting analysis. If you're giving numbers and data, which you always should, you should back them up with some real data, as is documentation that shows where the problem is originating. You want to have that starting point and a level set. This next phase is where you create solution proposals and draw those pretty diagrams. Remember that your solution proposals are very likely going to change, so don't get too attached to them along the way. A few other important things happen at this phase. If there's any technology selection to be done, it happens here. Any proofs of concepts that need to be built, that also happens here. And last, but very important one, is a new ubiquitous language gets shaped. Most of that ubiquitous language is going to be revealed at the problem statement phase, but for any new concepts that you're introducing as part of your solution, you will need to name them. And this is where it happens. And this is where they become part of ubiquitous language. This next phase is where you take your solution from concept or proof of concept to production. And this is the phase that consulting architects don't often stay for. The artifacts here are your scaffold that you're going to build, and if possible or necessary, actual production code. The most important piece that happens at this phase is you are managing change. As implementation starts, you will discover assumptions that weren't voiced, technology limitations that weren't discovered, or requirements creep. And you will need to adapt and compensate for those new discoveries. This last phase, which is always the longest, is enhancement and maintenance. Your code is running in production, and you get to live with consequences of your decisions, which is what distinguishes an in-house architect from a consulting one. The measure of success is not whether you have to make changes. The answer to that is always yes. The measure of success is how big of a change do you need to make and how quickly and easily you can make it. It's worth saying one thing about decisions. All through this process, architect is making decisions, and that's a big topic unto itself that requires a whole new separate talk, but it is a big part of architecture function. All right, well, path to the architect's role can be windy. The role of a software architect should be clear. Software architect provides leadership in the three major areas: people, technical, and thought leadership. And if you're leading in these three areas, you might already be an architect.
Thank you, Sonya, very much for this amazing talk. We do have quite some questions for you.
Of course.
Let's start with this comment. Keith, the problem domain of IT solution is complicated enough without introduced complexity. How do you actually help the team to distinguish between essential and accidental complexity?
One way to think about essential complexity is, does it differentiate the business? Is it your secret sauce? Or is it something that can easily be commoditized, gotten somewhere else, utilized across the board? If, for example, if I'm in fintech, maybe my differentiator is I can run transactions so much faster. That's great. If that's my differentiator, I will focus on that. Other things, and complexity here will be complexity that I'm willing to solve. If there are other things that come along with it, how do I deploy code? If that becomes complex, I will look to simplify that as much as possible and look for commodity solutions for that.
That's great. Thank you very much. We in the team were curious. Do you know the situations if teams have tactical tornado inside of the team, someone who is very manager loves this person very much, but it's very difficult to work with this person because it's a bigger hacker, but manager decides to make this person to the architect. How can you prevent management from this decision?
I don't know that I have an answer for that. I think that conversation needs to be had within the team about roles and responsibilities of an architect. If they are willing to shepherd the process, which is a lot of what architects do, they really drive the process forward. That may not be a bad thing. If all decisions are being made by one person, that is very much a red flag. And this is the conversation to be had within a team. Do team members still have decision-making power to bring forward what they need? Honestly, it's always very hard for an architect to be alone. And if this person is aware of this, they will take whatever help they want, whatever help they feel they need, and they will share credit with the team for the work that they're doing. But it certainly is a conversation.
This is great. And we have another question to the leadership topics. A lot of focus on leadership. Should every engineer strive to be an architect?
No, I think that's the short answer. I am a big fan of keeping people and putting people where they want to be. If you're happy with what you're doing and there's work for you, that's great. If you want to move somewhere, move in a different functional area, in a different technical area, in architecture, that's great. That said, I would say engineers don't often realize when they've made the leap into architecture. And this is part of what I point out. If you've ever made a decision around major structural changes, if you brought in a new piece of technology, a lot of this, you're already architecting. You just don't have a formal title around this.
Do you think every team should have a dedicated architect, someone who has this title, or can this be shared role within the team?
It definitely can be shared. I think a point person is helpful, somebody who is known as, you can go to this person and ask them questions and they will either know how to answer them or direct you to somebody that does. I think that's helpful for the team because it doesn't necessarily distract them from the day-to-day. Architects are not always on the maker schedule, and they also help reduce disruptions for the rest of the team. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I've seen other models work very well where multiple people are sharing the responsibility.
Thank you very much for this answer. Let's jump to the next question because we still have quite some. How often should architects be writing production code versus designing systems?
I don't think that's math. I think the right answer is as often as they can. And sometimes many moons can go by when they can't. And sometimes they have a nice long periods when they can. I think it's certainly helpful to have your code go to production and see what happens. But ultimately, architects always live with, at least in-house ones, live with consequences of their decisions. And I find that to be a lot more important than anything else, because seeing decisions play out takes sometimes a long time. You don't know whether a decision was a good one or a bad one for weeks, months, sometimes years. And that's the important part of expertise that people miss out on.
Mm-hmm. I think this question goes in a similar direction. Should architects take responsibility for delivery estimation and delivery on time? Being an architect, how to set boundaries of responsibilities with project management?
I have a very complicated relationship with estimation, especially when an estimate becomes a deadline. I look at an architect, and ultimately I look at a software engineer as a little bit of everything. It's a unique role where engineers are required to understand the business, to understand project management, to understand technology, and blend these things. And architects probably more so. Architects certainly help inform a lot. And a lot of this information is, I see this being a big, complicated problem. We may need to, look at a new technology. We may need to get rid of this aging infrastructure. I think a lot of it is their role. They don't become product or program management, but they work very, very closely with those functions to make sure that engineering teams can function well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your answer. So, what is the most common and worst thing one can do in the role of architect?
Tell people do it because I said so. I think that's a really tough one. This is where you get sabotage and resistance very often. And it can be frustrating to have the same conversation many, many times, but sometimes that's what it takes. I don't love the committee approach. I don't love the I approve or disapprove approach. That becomes very ungrounded. But it is, like, you could see people shut down when you tell them, oh, just do it.
True. Developers have to live this decision. They cannot just dictate it.
You basically shut down creativity. I want engineers to be creative. I'm not going to have all the answers. And if I am to work with others and elicit the best sides of them, I need to give that space to come up with unique, different things that we can try out.
And this makes a lot of sense. Here we have another question. Are there any negative traits useful for architect role?
I guess it's hard for me to answer this. I don't know what a negative trait is because all of this in context. I am decisive. It might look the same way as authoritarian. It's not the same thing, but the perception can differ. So I wouldn't call any specific trait as negative. You have to take it in the situation that it arises.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. And let's take this one as the last one for today. I spoke with several architects, and they all said the most important quality for an architect is having a strong gut feeling. What do you think about it?
Oh, I love this question. I am a huge fan of intuition. I think intuition, that gut feeling, develops from your lived experience, assuming you have a good amount of experience. And it's a really good first pass at what you think about, I assume, a given proposal or solution. It's not good enough to just say, ooh, I don't like it. I don't feel right about it. Let's go with it. You always want to go back to that gut feeling and understand where it came from. For me, I tend to think through this usually on my way home. Why did I react this way? Why did I think something wasn't good or something was great? What comes up is lived experiences and some much better reasoned arguments for why. So I tend to trust it quite a bit, but it does come with experience. I wouldn't say a junior engineer would have it, but as an architect, yeah, I think I trust that.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for your insightful session and all the amazing answers. Thank you so much for being with us.
Chris, thank you.
All right. I think it's the end of the conference. Let's put this slide sheet here. So yeah, let's talk about my feeling, or our feelings, right? So yeah, it was a great conference. And to be honest, I have a deja vu because in 2021, we organized another conference with some of my friends it was the first international TDD conference. Probably some of you been there. Anyway, what happened there, it's happened here as well. And what happened here that we succeeded to collect a lot of individuals from the industry who care about software quality, who care about the same things what we care. And we have seen also in the Canback session that Canback specifically invited the haters of TDD to come. And based on the comments, we didn't have any, because it seems like there is not much to come up against TDD. So it means that we are on a good track. it means that the practices that we do daily, such as test development, continuous delivery, refactoring, clean code best practices, work, and these are the way to produce quality software. So I'm super happy to feel this same feeling again after 3 years. So I would like to say thank you for the organizers and of course the audience, because it was incredible to see a lot of engagements. We also broke records, also in views, also in engagements, also in the number of comments and questions we had in the Q&A. So that's really made a lot of numbers. So again, thank you everyone. And basically that was it. I'm not going to make it longer because it's the end of the day in Europe and it's time to rest maybe. So thanks a lot everyone. And I would say don't forget that we will continue doing our Tech Excellence meetups. We have already plans to do some great sessions, so stay with us in the future as well. And thanks again for everyone. Well, then, see you next time. Oliver, Alina, you have something to add at the last? Feel free.
Yeah, thanks to the audience. I mean, it shows that actually we are quite a cool community and there's no ranting, no bashing, no people hating against each other, as you said, what Kempak said actually. So let's continue like that. And I think then software engineering has a great future ahead.
Also from my side, thank you very much for all your support and on the positive comments. We didn't have to remove anything, and this is an amazing sign that we are a great community. Thank you for being with us.
Exactly. Great synergy. Let's keep it up. Let's keep it up. All right, then. I wish everyone a great day or evening or whatever, what you have. And yeah, see you in the next meetup of Tech Excellence. Thanks and all the best.
Thank you. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.